Hello, and welcome to the JAGGAER Indirect 19.1 release feature demonstration for accounts payable. We invite and encourage you to test the new features available in the 19.1 release. You will have 3 weeks to verify the new functionality, but please test as early as possible after it's promoted to the testing environment on March 17th. Report anything that you feel needs to be corrected. Our teams are waiting for your feedback so that we can quickly work to resolve it before we promote the release to your production environment on April 7th. In an effort to enhance the functionality of our new forms, the 19.1 release includes a significant update to our check request forms. The 19.1 Accounts Payable release also includes a heavy focus on global e-invoicing. Customers conducting business outside of the United States need their e-invoicing procedures to be in compliance with the legal requirements of the various countries in which they do business. Let's discuss the first of our new features in the 19.1 release, the enhancements made to check request forms. Currently, forms in the JAGGAER AP solution lack certain functionality required by users to allow their AP teams to manage form requests efficiently and effectively. JAGGAER is committed to significant enhancements for all of our new forms, beginning in this release with the AP-specific forms such as check requests. The 19.1 updates for check requests consists of a number of advancements, which includes the following. The check request now includes the ability to search for suppliers via an updated interface on the check request form. If the supplier being searched for is selected, automatic population of the remit to address found on the supplier's profile will now be inserted in the remit to address field on the check request. If a supplier has more than one remit to address, the remit to address on the check request will automatically populate with the primary remittance address of the supplier. Previously, attachments added to check request forms using a question type of file upload were contained only on the form and did not transfer to the generated invoice. Now, attachments can be optionally included on the generated invoice if desired. The addition of form questions and answers included in a check request has been added as a rule element to invoice workflow. Users can now use questions or answers populated on the check request to route the form to the appropriate user for approval within the invoice workflow. Forms now have the ability to create multiple check requests to be submitted on a single check request form. A typical use case for this feature is a payment request for travel expenses. If a user needs separate check requests for travel expenses such as meals, hotels, airfare, and so on, it's cumbersome to fill out 5 separate forms. Users can now use a multi-check request form template that adds multiple lines to the form created from a single form request. Let's go into the Accounts Payable solution now to see these new features in action. To view the first of our new features for check requests, which is the auto-population of the supplier remit to address, I'll access the forms as a user under the Shop tab here. So I'll go up to Shop, and then Shopping, and then click on View Forms. And you can see here on the left-hand side, I've got a number of folders in there, and check requests is shared with others in the organization, and within that folder is the check request direct pay form that I'll be using. One quick note to mention that if you are an administrator with the ability to view and edit forms, then you can find this template and create this template under Administer, Shopping Settings, Manage Request Templates. Once you create the template here, you can share it just like I did and shared it with others in the organization, and they could find it under the Shopping tab, under View Forms, or within their favorites. Okay? So let's go ahead now and submit a check request. I'll do so by clicking this button here. Let me just bypass the instructions and the details to get to the new supplier feature. So here you'll see a couple of changes to the user interface when selecting a supplier that you want to associate to this check request. First, I want to show you the ability for type ahead when searching for your suppliers. So for example, if I begin to type my supplier's name here, if one is located with those characters, then it will show up here and allow me to select it just like this. Now, once the supplier is selected, you'll see a new feature that's provided in the 19.1 update here that will auto-populate the remit to address located on the supplier's profile if one exists. If the supplier has more than one remit to address, then it will populate the address that's listed as the primary remit to address. However, I have the option to change the remit to address here if needed. You'll also see a new field down below here for payment method. This will show the payment method used for this check request. Now, please note that this feature is available for users who also have the supplier management license enabled. If a payment method is included on the supplier profile, it will show here. If the supplier has multiple payment methods listed on their profile, both will show. Any inactive payment method will be italicized here, so you can kind of differentiate the one that's active from any that are inactive. If the supplier does not have a remit to address populated, then nothing will be displayed automatically, and that will instead allow you to populate the required remit to address values here on this screen. So let me show you how that works. I'll go ahead and do a quick search for a supplier that I know does not have a remit to address on their profile, Darkstark Tech here, and that will bring up any of the fields here that you need to populate for their remit to address. This information will also be displayed here if you want to enter manually, but of course you'll have to complete some additional information here. Let me cancel manual entry. I also want to point out a new feature here for supplier search. So while the type ahead will work and allow you to select for the appropriate supplier, you can click on supplier search here. And if you do a search on this screen here, I'll do a search for Veridian. We'll click search. You can select from here, or if you want to find out more information about that supplier, you can click on the supplier's name and it'll take you directly to their Supplier 360 page so you can learn more about that supplier and verify that this is the appropriate one. You can also find information about any contracts that you have with that supplier. Let's now have a look at the second subfeature for the check request updates, and that's the ability to upload attachments to questions of the file upload type, which can then be transferred to the invoice in the internal attachments section. So to see this new feature in action, let's go ahead and go into a draft check request form. So to do that, I'll go back into Administer. I'll go into Shopping Settings and we'll go into Manage Request Templates. Let me leave here. And from here, I'll just select this one that I've got created here. And let me go directly to the Questions tab here. So we've got a variety of different questions here with a variety of different response types. To see this new feature in action, let's go ahead and add a new question. I'll click on the Add button at the bottom, and I'll go on to Add Question, and then this flyover will display, and it'll ask you for question text, which is required. So I'll just go ahead and put anything in there, but what I want to show you is under the response type here. So if I select the drop down, you'll see if I select File Upload, you'll see a new option here that says Add to Invoice. Now, note that this checkbox is only visible on questions of the file upload type that I just selected for check requests and credit memo requests. Now, when this checkbox is checked, any files uploaded for this question will be copied over to the internal attachments section of the generated invoice in the same exact manner as attachments that are added to the attachments section directly on the invoice. Let me go ahead and save this here. So we see the new question down here. It's up the file upload type. Let's go up to template actions and we'll preview this template just so we can see what it looks like here. And if I go down to the question section and I go down to the bottom here, that question is displayed with the upload button, and you'd see that because we have that checkbox checked to add to invoice, it will say that uploaded attachment will be copied to the invoice. Now, an administrator does have the ability to set the maximum number of attachments when creating the invoice, and that can be configured under Setup, and then we'll go to General Site Settings, and then System Settings and Configuration. And if I look under the miscellaneous sections here and expand that, you can see the number of maximum attachments per object is currently set at 10, and then as an administrator, I can go in and edit that and make any changes as necessary. Now, while we're on the topic of questions in a check request form, let's discuss the third subfeature for the check request updates, and that's the ability to expose questions from this template within the invoice workflow. This will allow the routing of your invoices to the appropriate approvers for review and approval based on the responses to these questions. So let's take a look at the invoice workflow so we could see how we can implement this feature. To do that, I'll go down to Setup, Workflow Setup, and then Invoice Workflow Setup. I'll then navigate to the Workflow Process tab as I want to add a new rule to a rule group that I already have created called AP Review. So I'm just going to create a new rule within this rule group here. So to do that, I'll go to Advanced Dynamic Workflow. I'll go ahead and go into AP Review and click Search, and this will display a listing of all the rules within this particular group, and then I can go in and add a rule. Now, it's important to know that in order to create new rules for your invoice workflow, it is necessary to have the appropriate permissions for your user. So, of course, you'll need the ability to create and edit forms and view and use forms to be able to do that for the check request, but you'll also need the administration permission as well as the advanced dynamic workflow permission to add any rules as we're going to do right now. Now, this new option to add your questions and responses can be found as a new line level rule. So if we take a look down here for add a new rule for A, we can go down here and we want to make sure that we select form data as this is related to a form. And then when the screen refreshes, it'll give you an option to select from a number of different types here. This will be, of course, a check request template question. So if I select that, go ahead and click on Go. Now, this overlay will show me which check request template I want to choose my questions from. So we have a drop down here. You can see we have a couple of different check requests here. I'll go ahead and select this one here. The screen will refresh, and now it will show a listing of all of the different questions that are on that check request. So I'll go ahead and select this one, was the distance over 500 miles? Now, in this case, the response type for this question was chosen to be a yes-no response. So I will select yes here to configure this rule and then hit save. And now if the user who is submitting this form selected yes as an option to this question on the check request, then this workflow rule will trigger in the AP review step and then route this invoice to the approver associated to this workflow rule. And you can, of course, add your approver right here when you're working with Advanced Dynamic Workflow. I do want to point out that all response types, including standard response types, are available to use in this workflow rule, with the exception of multi-line text fields and the standard description field. So in this case, we use the yes-no question type as an example. Okay, let's now move on to discuss our last subfeature for our new check requests, and that is the ability to generate multi-check requests. And this will allow users to associate multiple checks as separate lines on a single check request. Now, to allow for this, an administrator will need to be sure to create a check request form using the newly added multi-check request template. So let me show you where that is. I'll navigate to Administer and then Shopping Settings and go to Manage Request Templates here. And if I want to create a new template, I want to hit the Build a New Request Template button here. And the options that I have to choose from, we've of course got check request, credit memo request. This is the new one here, multi-check request. So if you want this capability, you need to be sure to select this type of request template. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'll navigate to a multi-check request template that I've already created so we can see what the submission process will be like for your users that use the form. But note that the same wizard for the creation of this check request, the multi-check request, is displayed as it looks for the regular check request. So let me now navigate to Shopping, View Forms. Again, here's a shared check request folder where I've created and shared my multi-check request template for my users. And I'll go in and submit a request. Of course, we've got our first screen for instructions. We'll click on Next. and then we will click on details here. Again, our new supplier search capability is here on the multi-check request template as well, of course. So let's go ahead and type in, let's see, do this. And this looks good to me. We'll click on next. We've got all of our questions here. Go ahead and type in an amount. That's the only required field here. We'll click on next. We've got our accounting codes here. For purposes of this video, none of these are required, so we can go ahead and bypass that and any additional information. Our attachments capabilities here. Let's go ahead and click on next. And one main difference you'll see from the regular check request template as opposed to this multi-check request template is this new tab here for check requests. So this will display a listing of all of the lines that you created on this multi-check request template. I'm going to go in and create additional check request on this multi-check request template, and then we'll see a new line here. If I need to, if I made a mistake on this particular line, I can go in, hit the drop down, and discard this particular request line. Now, note that if I have multiple lines here, this option will discard the most recent of the lines that you created. So in other words, if I have 4 lines here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I go up to discard request, it will remove that 4th one, the most recent one. So let me go in and just add an additional one here. I'll click on next. Now we can submit this form just like we would for a regular check request. But one thing I want to point out is this new feature here, because it's a multi-check request form, a new option to save and add another is present. So let's go ahead and click on that. And what that will do is refresh the screen. It'll say that the form is now added as a multi-check request successfully. And each save and add another action adds an additional line that will be generated from this form. Let me close that up. And we'll just go through this process once more. I'll click on next. Again, we can add our supplier. Each line that we create will generate a new invoice. So you actually have the option of adding a different supplier in here if needed. I'll select the same one, click on next. Let's put on a different amount here. That's the only required field. And we can go ahead and kind of zip through some of these here just for the purposes of this video. Attachments. And now, again, we're at the check requests, and this will show a listing of all of the check requests that we have here. You'll see that, again, while I can go in and discard the most recent request, you can still go in and make changes to any of your requests. As I keep adding new ones here, we'll have the ability to go in and edit them. So I can click on edit, and it'll pop up here and allow me to go in and change it. Let's say this, I originally had it $150, but it was actually $150.35. I can go ahead and save this. Next. I can save and close. And now you can see that first line was updated with the most recent change that I made here, now to $150.35. If I've completed this, I can go in and actually add this to my favorites like we saw earlier. And this will add this particular form that you created that's pre-populated with any of the information that's necessary for your users to make their job a little easier when submitting these. You can save it as a populated multi-check request template within a shared folder for them. So I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to show you the capabilities there. I'm going to go ahead and go into review and submit. I can save and add another, or I will submit. So I'll go ahead and hit submit here. Are you sure you want to submit this form? I do. So now we've submitted our check request, our multi-check request here. Let's go ahead and take a look at form approvals here to see what needs to happen. You can see here that there is a new workflow step in here to create multiple non-PO invoices for this multi-check request template. So what it's doing right now is it's going through, it's reading each one of those lines, and it's generating a brand new invoice for each one of those lines. Of course, your workflow may look considerably different. Your form approval workflow, you'll likely have a number of approvers going in there prior to this step to approve that before the invoice is created, because it is a non-PO invoice and there's no requisition workflow or PO workflow. So you definitely want to have those checks in place. But for the purposes of this video, we just have one single workflow step in here to create the multi-PO, multi-non-PO invoice. I'll go ahead and refresh that, and you can see that it's been completed. Now let's go over to the Documents tab here. I want to show you one other thing before we take a look at that invoice. If I go to Documents, Document Search, Search Documents, I just want to point out that this type of request is now included as a document type for searching. So if I go into Search Form Requests and I click on Form Purpose, you can see now multi-check request exists there. So if I click on Search, you can see that it'll show a listing of all the multiple multi-check request templates that I've created. Okay, but what I want to do is go into Documents, Document Search, Search Documents. And let's change that to Invoice. Now, our form completed going through the form approval workflow, so the invoices were created. Again, each line that I had on that multi-check request is going to create a separate invoice here. So if I search invoices, and let's change the date to today, and I'll click on search. You can see here that there are two invoices that were generated, one for each line, just a couple of minutes apart here. If we click into that invoice, you can see that the invoice name, it showed by default because that was what was populated when we created it, is called multi-check request template. But you can see the invoice source is form request. And if I go down further, you can see that each line has been created. It's showing the updated price. Remember when I went in and edited that, it's showing the most recent price in there. Let's now move on to discuss an additional enhancement made to the accounts payable solution during the 19.1 release, and that's related to global e-invoicing. In the 19.1 release, we've introduced a new global e-invoicing feature to accounts payable. It's been created to help organizations configure their system so that it captures the data that's required to meet international requirements for electronic invoicing. Implementation of the global e-invoicing feature will require a new license and will affect many areas of accounts payable. And these changes include country configuration options for invoice fields that will allow administrators to define how a system field is displayed on an invoice based on the country selected on an invoice's remit to address. For example, a system field could be set up to be displayed on invoices for suppliers located in France, but not displayed on invoices for suppliers located in Germany. This feature will also include access to new system fields specific to global invoicing necessary to meet international requirements. The invoice to credit memo relationship will change so that credit memos can only be created from an invoice. To meet international compliance requirements, credit memos and invoices must have a one-to-one relationship. Also, to meet international requirements for fraud prevention, some invoice fields will be locked and set to read-only once the invoice is sent for digital signature. PDFs will be generated to allow for digital signature and archiving and can be configured to do so based on the requirements of the country you're doing business in. For more information on this new feature and how to incorporate it into your organization, please see our 19.1 Accounts Payable Release Notes document. Now that you've learned about the new features available with the JAGGAER Indirect 19.1 release for accounts payable, start testing them for your organization. We hope this new functionality will empower procurement at your organization, and we welcome you to contact us with your questions and feedback.